Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Pretty Gritty Tours. I'm your guide tonight, Chris. And tonight we are getting to explore the stories and times of some of the most famous, or in some cases not famous, but deserving of more fame, women heroes of the Puget Sound region. And the whole purpose of tonight is kind of twofold. One, it is to celebrate the success and stories of these women. And the other is to generate interest and as a fundraiser for the American Cancer Society's Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And earlier, back in September, when I was approached about whether or not I would be interested in becoming an ambassador for the Real Men Wear Pink campaign, raising awareness and funds for breast cancer awareness and research, it was a no-brainer for me. I jumped on board instantly. For those of you who know me, I suspect this will not come as a surprise, but I come from a family of strong women. I've been raised by a strong woman. I married a strong woman, and I hope to be raising a strong woman right now. So it is a cause that is near and dear to me, especially because my mother's mother, my grandmother, passed when I was very young due to breast cancer. And to have something that is so... it's such an easy step to go and get screened and to have early detection and to catch something in its early stages, just to raise awareness for that and to encourage people to take that small, what seems like insignificant, but can be life-changing step, is something that I fully endorse. And so if tonight we can celebrate some stories in the area and also give back to a very worthwhile cause, I'm on board. So tonight you will get to see this little QR code up in the corner. All you have to do at any point is open your mobile device, Android or iPhone. The camera will scan that QR code. It'll say, do you want to go to the website? You click yes, and it will take you to the donation site. We are currently trying to raise, me personally, $2,500 through the month of October to help raise awareness for breast cancer and then contribute to finding a cure. If you guys have questions along the way tonight, please let me know. It's good to see you all. I'm glad that you're here. And I'm genuinely excited to talk about these stories tonight because here's the deal. It was almost impossible to choose how to fit this all into an hour because there are so many extraordinary women that have done great works throughout the Puget Sound area from the very beginning days when people showed up out here to now. And so I've tried to do a good sampling. I'll let you know right now, it's not at all a comprehensive work. And I could spend probably my entire life documenting, celebrating, and then relaying these stories to people. So I'll do what I can with what we've got tonight. Let's begin. So fittingly enough, the first person that I would like to bring your attention to is, of course, Carol Milgard. And the Tacoma-based people out here who have taken previous tours may be familiar with Ms. Milgard, but she is the woman that the Carol Milgard Breast Center has been dedicated to. It is part of her philanthropic mission and fund that created the Carol Milgard Breast Center, which, as the name implies, is an institution dedicated to helping people detect, treat, and then survive breast cancer. And as a 30-year breast cancer survivor herself, it was a cause that was very dear to her heart. And the Milgard family has continued on their philanthropic mission throughout the Pierce County area, donating to a series of really incredible and worthwhile humanitarian causes out here. And then today, this was the artistic rendering, but the Carol Milgard Breast Center is here right now at 4525 South 19th Street in Tacoma, Washington. It is a nonprofit, patient-centric, sort of state-of-the-art breast imaging center, jointly owned by Virginia Mason Franciscan Health and Multicare. So it is a facility that would allow early detection of any issues that might arise with breast cancer. And I sincerely pray and hope that no one has to go there in their time here. But if you ever find yourself needing treatment, there is a multitude of options. But again, early detection is key here. So let's celebrate Ms. Milgard for a moment as a hero in the Puget Sound region, helping people just generate awareness and get out there to be treated for something that nobody should have to die from. Now, when we're talking incredible stories throughout the area, I'm going to definitely recommend Badass Women in the Pacific Northwest. This is a free online publication. It's structured as a digital magazine, essentially, and it was created by Professor Julie Shane and librarians Penelope Wood and Denise Hatwig, along with their peer facilitator Nicole Carter. And the Seattle region has created this really tremendous resource that talks a lot about women that have created a lasting impact and legacy, often against the grain here in the Pacific Northwest. And it's a really good resource for it. And Washington has had a long history of women activists making bold changes in the area. In 1883, Washington became one of the first places in the world where women could vote. And unfortunately, it didn't last long. The power of the vote got stolen from them, and it's actually stolen again and again until eventually there was a massive, long-standing suffragette movement in the state of Washington that eventually led to Washington state being one of the first states to allow women to vote before it became a national amendment to the Constitution. And two of the women that were pioneers in this that often don't get any recognition for this achievement are two sisters, Mary Olney Brown and Emily Olney French. And they actually came via wagon from the Iowa Territory into Washington back in 1852 and almost instantly started kicking up trouble in the area. They were polarizing figures because they were popular with quite a few people, specifically women, but also very unpopular with a lot of people that wanted to maintain the status quo. And these two sisters, aside from being just awesome and arriving here via wagon, were abolitionists. They believed that slavery was absolutely an inappropriate way to conduct any sort of life. They also believed that not only women, but African Americans should have the ability to vote and change the destiny of our country. So deeply polarizing figures, but it was their galvanizing efforts and their passion that actually propelled a lot of the suffragettes in Washington state that actually achieved the vote. Now, unfortunately, both of these women passed away before the amendment that allowed women to vote here in the United States, and they never got to see the fruits of their labor. But I like to believe that they were passionately happy with the lives that they led. And everything that I've read about them seems to indicate that the crusade was what kept them going throughout their days. Another remarkable woman in Washington's early history is Mary Elizabeth Ordway, or Lizzie Ordway. She's, I think, more commonly known throughout the area. And she was born in the 1820s, 1828, way back in the New Hampshire area, and then came out and was part of this Mercer's group. It was the Mercer's group of women. And together, they were this eligible group of bachelorettes that were out on Mercer Island in the very early days of Seattle. And of the original Mercer's group, all of these women got married off except for Lizzie here. And Lizzie dedicated her entire life to being an educator. And she first taught in Central School in Seattle in the very, very pioneer days of Seattle. And the first time she rang the bell, 100 children showed up to the school. And she was like, no, not today. So she took the youngest ones of them and sent them home to, quote, ripen for education, end quote. And then taught, I forget what the actual head count was when she taught that first class, but through her efforts, she convinced the powers that be in the Seattle area that they should hire, believe it or not, another teacher. And thus they did. Now, she goes on to be an educator for the remainder of her life. She never marries and teaches, I think, for the majority of her time on Coupeville out on Whidbey Island. But eventually she becomes the superintendent for schools throughout Kitsap County. And it was remarkable at the time that a woman would become the superintendent for education out there. But she was flawless at it. I haven't read anything that says that she was anything but absolutely perfect at her job. So she was an educator, becomes superintendent of education out in Kitsap, and then eventually she actually joins with Susan B. Anthony and founds the Female Suffrage Society in Seattle and lobbies the state capitol for women's rights. And then actually she was part of the county education board examining and certifying teachers, and lives and dies her entire life out in the Seattle region, where eventually her legacy for education and advancing women's rights becomes legendary for the area. And I want to stress the fact that we're only talking about a few of the remarkable women in the area tonight, because time only allows for so much glory. But the story of women advancing individual rights, women's rights, minority rights, human rights in the area is a never-ending volume, and there needs to be more activity bringing that to light. So this picture is actually one of my favorites. This is from Sheet Metal Shop 17, and it was taken, I believe, in 1943 of two sheet metal workers. Pearl Sanchez is on the left there, and Mary Saint-Savier is on the right. And these are women that, when there was a need for more labor here, as men had been deployed overseas for World War II, rose to the cause and, didn't get the credit they deserve a lot of times for doing jobs that they were often told that they couldn't do. Which brings me to one of the absolute greatest heroes of the region, Rosa Franklin. I imagine a lot of you know this woman. If you don't, it's my pleasure to introduce you. She is the first African-American woman to serve as a Washington state senator. She attended several South Sound universities, and she earned her master's degree in social science and human relations from Pacific Lutheran University. A shout out to my alma mater. I'm just saying, it produces some very good talent in the area. And she was born actually in South Carolina as the youngest of 12 children, and eventually moved around South Carolina a few times, got her degree in nursing originally, bounced around a little bit more, found herself in New Jersey, and was taking care of people as a nurse before eventually she moved to a military base in Germany with her husband, and they started a family. And as is so often the case, her husband's military career found them back here in the Pacific Northwest, where she had 40 years of nursing experience and then found herself wanting to make a larger scale change. So she runs for political office and, takes it really in a landslide. And again, she was the first Black woman to serve as a Washington state senator back in the 70s, and really just changes everything. One of the things that I think is the most incredible about her is that she acts as this beacon for other women who now have become or even are actively serving as state legislators. She was one of the first women that I've been told of that really showed people, hey, you can do this. And so seeing a Black woman in this position of power has been referenced again and again by young Black women in the area as the moment where they're like, really, truly, there is no limit to what I can achieve in the area. There's something better on the horizon for me. And so she was really encouraged by her friends to have this grassroots campaign. She launches it. She becomes, in 1990, elected to representative number 1 from the 29th district. And then she wins re-election again, and then just changes everything. Eventually, she goes on to dedicate more time to community service work, and then really changes the landscape of Tacoma with the various things that she's done in the area. And if you're in the area and you have the opportunity in central Tacoma, you can actually visit what is now, just this year, renamed Senator Rosa Franklin Park. It is right next to, believe it or not, Franklin Elementary and the Franklin Community Garden. And this was just rededicated to Senator Rosa Franklin Park in, I believe, July of this year. So very, very new. But she's part of a proud legacy of women that changed the status quo in the area, including this young woman right here, Thelma Dewitty, who was, like so many people that have changed the area, not born here originally. She's actually from Texas originally and began her school career as a teacher in Corpus Christi back in the 1930s. And then eventually she gets her degree from Wiley College in Texas, transfers a few more times, and then by the 1940s finds herself in the mid-40s up here attending University of Washington, where she writes a book on mathematics for children. And her husband's working in Seattle at the time, and she's trying to get a job as a teacher in the area. And so with the Seattle Urban League, the NAACP, and the Civic Unity Committee, and Christian Friends for Racial Equality, she's involved in all these groups, and they're encouraging her to start, trying to get in as a teacher. And eventually she becomes the first Black woman teacher in the city of Seattle back in 1947. And it was groundbreaking for a couple of reasons. Not only was it that she was a Black woman who became an educator there, but also she was married, which was unheard of at the time. Before 1947, if a woman was married, she was not a school teacher throughout really all of Washington, but specifically here in Seattle. And so when she gets brought on as an educator, there's a lot of expectation that it's going to make a lot of waves out in Seattle. And so the principal at the time's like, hey, listen, other teachers, if you're uncomfortable with this, here's the door, find your way out and you can go. And nobody quit. In fact, the only person on record as raising any alarms about the whole thing was actually a mother of one student there who asked to have their young child transferred out of the classroom because she didn't want to have a Black woman teaching her, and the principal refused the request. Everything I've ever seen about Mrs. DeWitty's teaching career shows it as exemplary. And in fact, at her retirement, the outpouring of affection for this woman as a teacher and just an inspirational figure is staggering. All of these former students that came back from various walks of life or various geographic regions to thank her for the impact that she had on their life is amazing. So I think it's important to commend her not only for her courage and dedication for forging the way for Black women to teach in the area, but also just as a teacher herself. She changed the way that children interacted with mathematics, something that is not an easy to digest topic by itself. So as a woman, as a pioneer, as a leader, and as a math teacher, she really changed so many lives throughout the area. And for all of those things, I think she deserves a round of applause. She goes on to teach at Laurelhurst and then Sandpoint Elementaries, and then finally at Meany Junior High School, I believe through 1978 was the last time. And she changes not just lives, but also several school traditions, including assigned seats in the teacher's room. Not just assigned seats in the classroom, assigned seats in the teacher's room. And also the way that school supplies were distributed used to be very, I can't even think of the word for it, harsh, brutalistic. But she really streamlines the way that people can get access to materials in the classroom and creates a more welcoming environment for people to learn and for the teachers themselves to actually educate. She goes on to serve for the Washington State Board Against Discrimination and then on the Board of Theater Supervisors for Seattle as in King County. So truly a remarkable woman, and her achievements have inspired so many more. And both of these women have inspired women that now work in our communities, including, as you already know, personal hero Tawana Nobles, featured here second from the left in the sort of orange top here. Now, Tawana Nobles is currently serving as an American politician. She has been an educator here in the city of Tacoma at both Stadium High School and Lincoln High School. She is the member of the Washington State Senate today, currently from the 28th District, and was just elected back in 2020. I think she was inaugurated this January. Time means nothing to me right now, so I'm doing my best. It's like the contemporary stuff is harder to remember. But Tawana also was born not in the Tacoma area. She lived for a period of time actually homeless, and then in the foster care system. And she met the director of a homeless shelter, a woman named Mrs. Miles, who encouraged her to leave a lasting impact for the better in the community. And so when she ends up here in Pierce County, she takes that mission to heart. And I think some of the things that really put her on my radar and have encouraged me to look at her as a personal hero is that in the early days of the pandemic, a lot of children in sort of lower income households were going to get left behind when everything moved virtual. And I'm sure she would deny that this was an effort that was really solely on her shoulders, because she is a huge community activist. But Ms. Nobles really took on the burden of making sure that all of these students had access to a laptop and internet, so that they weren't going to just get neglected by an education system that jumped rapidly and jarringly to a virtual system. So she just scooped up into her arms all these children that were about to get left behind. And I believe that no student in the school district that she was serving in was without access to a laptop and internet during the time that everybody moved to a virtual education system. She has been a huge member, I believe, serving as the president for the Urban Action Committee, has been very active in the NAACP for the Tacoma chapter out here, and has just been a daunting figure for creating social justice throughout the city of Tacoma and greater Pierce County. She did graduate from the University of Puget Sound. I don't hold that against her, but a lot of the private institutions in this area here have churned out some of the most remarkable leaders and social activists throughout the area. Another huge hero for the area is Mayor Marilyn Strickland, former Tacoma Mayor Marilyn Strickland. She was the first African-American woman elected to Congress in the state of Washington, and the first Korean-American woman in the U.S. Congress is 230-year history. And she was a huge activist for the city of Tacoma. She championed so many causes for social justice. And one of the things that, I mean, we could talk endlessly about the various contributions she's made to the city of Tacoma. As a more contemporary figure, I know people will always have opinions one way or the other. But I think one of the things that I thought was really impressive about her activism here was what she's done for the sister cities' relationships with the city of Tacoma. And having both a African-American and Korean heritage, plus having a lot of overseas experience, I think helped her really leverage relationships, including perhaps most predominantly was our sister city's relationship with China. And the city of Tacoma has had a long and tragic history with China. The city of Tacoma was responsible for what has been known as the Tacoma Method, where in 1885, the townspeople of Tacoma, led by the mayor, went down to Tacoma Chinatown, forced everyone out, murdered a great deal of people, and burned the Chinatown area to the ground. And working towards changing that legacy has been something that has been very important for Tacoma just recently. And I think Mayor Strickland was very instrumental in creating that relationship and helping people see China and the people that live there on a more human level, sort of demystifying that cross-Pacific attitude of this is a different country that we are sometimes hostile with. And so Chinese Reconciliation Park, as well as our sister city relationship with a lot of Korean cities, has been something that she was very pivotal with, as well as championing a great deal of causes to ensure that the minorities within the city of Tacoma don't get left behind as we charge into a new era of economic growth. So she absolutely makes my list of heroes in the area. She is currently serving in the U.S. Congress, and we're proud to have her there. Now, talking about political figures in the area, it would be absolutely wrong of me if I don't give a nod to Bertha Knight Landis. She was the first woman mayor for the city of Seattle, and she was active in all sorts of women's organizations, including the Women's University Club, the Rainier Club, the Women's Auxiliary of University Congregational Church, and she was just a outspoken and proud member of so many social groups, and served, I think, as the head or the president of the Women's Century Club from 1918 through like 1920. But from 1920 to 1922, Bertha served as the president of the Seattle Federation of Women's Clubs and was constantly just bringing this inspiration and energy to women's groups throughout the Seattle area. Eventually, she is elected as mayor, the first first woman mayor for the city of Seattle, and goes on to really bring about quite a lot of change. And when she's described, I'm trying to remember what the official quote was, but she decides to run for city council in 1922. And I believe her husband said something. Let's see if I can find the quote here. It's simply the natural enlargement of her sphere. Keeping house and raising a family are a woman's logical tasks, and in principle, there's no difference between running one's home and the home of 100,000. So we'll put this in context right now. But Bertha very much ran the city of Seattle with the same level of organization, care, and I think deep personal connection that she had in her household. She then translated that to the political arena, which, again, you have to take the quote in context here. But I do think one of the things that was so exceptional about her is that she really ran for this office and then seems to have conducted her duties as mayor, not using this as a platform for personal gain or like trying to enhance her business, because she was a woman at the time and wasn't allowed a lot of opportunities that the mayoral office would have given to other candidates. She really ran it with a level of organization, fairness, and open-mindedness that wasn't seen for a while after. And one of the greatest achievements she made while she was the mayor of Seattle was fighting corruption. She really cleaned house and was not afraid to speak her mind and then to remove elements that were bad for the city, and kept a cabinet that had, I believe, relatively none of corruption. You know, when you look at Seattle mayors, you don't have to dig too deep to find a level of corruption in the cabinet. But Mayor Landis kept a tight ship and made sure that everything was run elegantly. So she changed a lot of things in the way that the police force operated. She saw that the regulations for dance halls and cabarets were enforced. She turned the tide of that widespread corruption that was going throughout all of Seattle and had essentially an honest, scandal-free administration for the entire time she was in office. And one of the things that was really, really extra special about her that we hadn't seen is that she made a point of appointing qualified professionals to the heads of city departments, not just friends or people that were trying to get ahead and like trying to grease the wheels of a political engine. She found people who were good at their job and put them in positions of power. So one of the things that, if you're in the Seattle area, she was perhaps most famous for was actually the City of Seattle's Civic Auditorium, which in the late 1880s, this land was donated. And then in 1927, Seattle citizens passed a $900,000 bond to have this place finally built. And in 1928, the Civic Auditorium was dedicated to, of course, Bertha Knight Landis. Unfortunately, this building is no longer around. The spot where it was is now occupied by this, which is another beautiful building, but of course, not the original. So when you look at the legacy, I think, of Mayor Landis, she left a cleaner, more organized, less crime-ridden Seattle by the time she was done. And unfortunately, just couldn't bring it around after a while, and then continues a lifetime of social activism in the Seattle area, but is no longer mayor. And it wasn't until, yikes, not too long ago that Seattle elected its second woman to be mayor. Very, very recently, if I'm not mistaken. So let's jump, while we're on the note of politics, to a Tacoma favorite. I hope that at least some of you are familiar with the life and times of Dixie Lee Ray, Stadium High School graduate, Tacoma native, American scientist, marine biologist, absolute brilliant woman, and politician who served as the 17th governor of Washington from 1977 to 1981. And for those of you who are around in that time, you will remember that she was governor when Mount St. Helens erupted. And the stories about her are colorful, I would say. When you go through, she was a jarring figure for a lot of people. She was definitely outspoken. She was confident. She was capable. And she had a very clear vision of how things should be run and went after them with a great deal of energy and efficiency. When you look at the documents around her funeral and passing, though, everyone, those who respected her when she was alive and those that fought against her aggressively, all remember her legacy as an incredibly capable woman, scientist, and politician who did a great deal for the state of Washington. And as the state's first female governor, she was really a pioneer. She started as an associate professor at the University of Washington in 1957, and then was actually the chief scientist aboard the schooner, the SS Tavega, which went on an international expedition through the Indian Ocean. And what she did on the ship, she then translated back in Seattle, where she ran it in a ship shape, I think is the best way to say it. She got back and she was employed by the Pacific Science Center, and she transformed it from a traditional exhibit-oriented museum to this interacting learning center that we have today, and returned it to solvency. She took a broke institution that was bleeding cash, that was not highly visited, and then refurbished it into really what you see today. If anyone has been to the Pacific Science Center, it is awesome. And it really draws people in because it encourages this hands-on, tactile learning. And to basically single-handedly turn that around into a lucrative industry was a feat. And so in 1973, she gets appointed as chairman of the United States Atomic Energy Commission, which is one of the more controversial positions in her history. She was a big proponent of atomic energy, and not everyone was on board with that. But she really wanted to have a state during her time where she was governor that was independent, that had its own energy supply, that was very fiscally stable. And so she kind of jarred people on both sides of the aisle. While she alienated some of her more democratic allies by being like, we need to have a lot of economic growth and atomic energy and build the state so that it can run independently. She also sort of alienated a lot of her Republican allies by being like, we need to focus on human rights and social activism throughout the state. For good or ill, she was definitely a powerful figure. And when she runs for election, she wins as a Democrat in 1976. And while she is described as blunt, confrontational, and aggressive, she is also described always as efficient, capable, and full of energy. And as a governor, as she did as a scientist, she had a lifelong campaign to make science interesting, to make it approachable. And so this is actually a shot of her when she was on a PBS show talking about marine biology and animals off the seashore, and trying to help propel this desire for people to become engaged, especially when they're young, in just understanding the way that the world works. Here she is signing a bill into law. You get to see a level of her eccentricity here. She invited all these people to come into the rotunda and see the bill being signed. But like I said, no matter where you land on her character or her policies, she did a tremendous amount to propel the state of Washington forward. And again, she will always be our first woman who served as governor. While we're talking about firsts, we have to talk about this woman right here, Faye Fuller, who in the summer of 1887, just 5 years after her family left the East Coast to resettle in Tacoma, she caught sight of Mount Rainier for the first time and vowed that she would summit it. And she took a trip up to Paradise and then became even more addicted. So her goal becomes the summit, which for those of you who aren't in the area is 14,411 feet. And at that time in the 1880s, the first two people to summit it were a local woodsman, and then of course our territorial governor right before statehood, Governor Isaac Stevens, who becomes the first state governor for the state of Washington. And she convinces them to take her on the expedition. So she's got no sunscreen. She has to rub charcoal on her face and wear these goggles so that she doesn't burn or get snow blindness as she's going up the summit there. And she does it in this outfit, guys. This heavy wool skirt is what she wears. This is a picture of her going up to the summit, and makes it. They make it up to Camp Muir by 4:30, and then next morning, they make it there that evening. 4:30 a.m. is where they start the ascent of the summit. And I think it was a small group. It was a gentleman named Robert Parrish, another guy named Longmire and Amsden. And together they go up, and she makes the summit, dodging rock falls, going up using just a single rope and the tools at the time. But at 20 years old, Faye Fuller is the first woman who we know of to have summited Mount Rainier. And she describes that peaceful, serendipitous moment at the top as pure heaven, a sensation that can only be known to those who have reached such heights. And she ends up inspiring an entire generation of women to explore outdoorsmanship and to, I guess, achieve the summit of their own dreams, including Ethelyn Smith, who later becomes known as Skit Smith. This young woman in the 1930s is the first national championship winner for downhill skiing. And it was held at Mount Rainier in April of 1935. And she wins it when she's 23. And then she goes on to be world renowned for downhill skiing. And her name, Skit, comes from when she graduates Stadium High School. She got the nickname for writing a humor column for the school newspaper. And this is a habit that she goes, or a habit that she takes on. Not only does she continue a lifetime of professional downhill skiing, but also of recreational riding throughout the area. So as an author and an athlete, Skit here makes my list of women heroes throughout the area. And yeah, I'm checking this out because you guys got some great comments in here. Yeah, I knew Dixie Lee Ray was going to have comments on both sides for those who remembered her as a governor. But hey, she's still making the list because she was a pivotal pioneering figure and definitely changed the way that the game are played for women throughout the state of Washington forever and always. Since we've delved into professional athletes, we're going to talk about another woman who, while not originally from the area, now calls Puget Sound home, Megan Rapinoe. Born in 1985, Megan Rapinoe has, I believe, 5 siblings, grows up in California, and, I mean, is always an amazing athlete. Mostly for what you know her for, soccer. But she does track, basketball. Eventually, she goes on to play for the club team Elk Grove United. Then, while playing for Elk Grove, is selected for the All-American game in 2004, and then participates in the Olympic Development Program. And then from 2005 to 2008, Rapinoe and her twin sister are both accepted for full-ride scholarships at the University of Portland, where she now enters our sphere of the Pacific Northwest. Eventually, she's selected for the U19 women's national team in 2008, and then is drafted into the Women's Professional Soccer League right out of college, where she plays from 2009 until 2011, where she accepts a bunch of overseas offers. So I believe she was in Australia and France before eventually coming back to the good old PNW, where she plays Seattle Reign, 2013. Now, Megan Rapinoe makes my list of heroes because she has never shied away from controversy. She is an outspoken member of the LGBTQ community, and in fact is, if I'm not mistaken, the first woman to, or the first female athlete to openly come out as lesbian during an interview with the National Out magazine. And not only is she an Olympian and a national treasure, but she has been a fierce advocate for maintaining, equality for women in athletics, but also just understanding activism and helping to maintain a more peaceful, socially just, and open-minded world. And she has used her global spotlight as an all-star athlete to champion the LGBTQ community's rights for here on out. So she is a representative of the Gay Lesbian Straight Education Network, where she primarily focuses on erasing the negative connotations associated with words like gay and queer, and then tries to promote an environment which encourages sexual equality on all platforms. So she is a huge champion of social rights in the area. She is a phenomenal athlete. She is based in the Pacific Northwest area, and she is married to our second athlete woman hero from Puget Sound, Susan Bird, or Sue Bird, who is also born in the 1980s, from New York originally, but now, after going to the University of Connecticut in the 1990s, where she plays basketball, she becomes very prominent, scooped up very quickly, and then finds her way, after winning the NCAA championship, not once, but twice. She goes on to be a huge member of the National Basketball Association. And in 2002, she was drafted as the #1 overall pick. And it was the first time, for those of you who care about basketball, that a point guard was given this position. She joins the Seattle Storm team in 2009, and then goes on to lead that team to scoring more than 14 points each game, was elected to the All-WNBA first team, and plays along other superstars like Lauren Jackson and Betty Lennox in 2004, which marks as the first WNBA championship. So both Sue Bird and Megan Rapinoe live now in the Seattle area, where as phenomenal athletes and social activists, they have led an entire generation to believing in themselves and creating a better world. Bird has also been a huge inspiration for a lot of people because she's been referred to as an American Israeli. And in 2012, she sort of drops off the main athletic stage from a knee or injury and then really dedicates herself towards social activism. So since we're spending some time up in Seattle, I want to talk to you about another woman that has always been a personal hero of mine, and I think really changed the landscape of Seattle's history in so many ways. And the thing that, I mean, it's hard to figure out what thing she's most famous for, but this is Ruby Cho. Okay. She was born in Seattle in 1920. She was the oldest daughter of 10 children. And during the Great Depression, she drops out of high school to help support her family. And she moves to New York for a while, where she works as a waitress at a gay bar. And then that experience changes her whole understanding of the world, where she now starts approaching life with this marked empathy. It's also where she meets Ping Chow, who is a member of the Chinese Opera Company. And in 1943, they get married, move back to Seattle. And in 1948, they buy this old mansion and convert it into a restaurant. And they open Ruby Chow's. And Chow's is the first restaurant in Seattle outside of Chinatown, the first Chinese restaurant, Chinese owned and operated outside of Chinatown. And she works as the hostess of this restaurant while her husband cooks. And she becomes like the face of the Chinese community to the white world of Seattle. And one of the things that she's really, I think, most famous for is just creating the human experience for people who, up until that point, really thought of the Chinese community as something foreign and scary. And so she really works hard to demystify Chinese culture for the white community in Seattle. And she does it the way that any good ambassador does, through amazing food and inviting people to parties. So she invites a lot of really prominent members of white Seattle to come to Lunar New Year celebrations. And they're like, oh, this isn't scary at all. This is just a really cool party to mark the transition of time. And so slowly, from this ground level, working its way up through the hearts of Seattle, she changes the way that people think about the Chinese community in Seattle and then beyond. And so while Chow's becomes incredibly popular and successful, the rest of the Chinatown community is still treated with a great deal of racism and ignorance. And so they moved to this next level of trying to promote just the understanding of Chinese culture throughout all of Seattle. And so she works all these years as a civic servant. And I think one of the things that she's probably most well known for is that it's Chow's that hosts Bruce Lee, pictured very dapper here in the middle of this photograph. Bruce Lee moves out of Hong Kong. He comes to Seattle. He gets his first job working as a waiter at Chow's, and they sort of act as his guardians. Ruby becomes the mom away from Bruce's mom and helps him navigate life in America. And it's this time where she's becoming a civic figure. She's trying to help people understand the Chinese community and trying to actually give back in a more meaningful way, that she decides to run for King County Council, 5th District, 1973. And she goes on the ballot as a Democrat, and she wins the seat by a narrow margin of 220 votes, becoming the first Asian American elected to the King County Council. And as one of the first people of color in the city or county government, she dedicates her time there to helping constituents, particularly immigrants, not just Chinese, but all immigrants. And so she lobbies the Seattle school superintendent to institute a bilingual program to accelerate English proficiency for England children so that they can be a part of this community. She focuses on human services, health needs, drug and alcohol services, and of course, low-income housing. And she is awesome at it. They eventually lease Ruby Chow's restaurant in 1979, retire from the restaurant business, and in 1984 announces that her third county council term would be her last. And so she goes on to work just towards more activism. So this is Ruby Chow's, by the way, in case you're curious. And here she is. One of the things that she really dedicated her life to is also a girls group called the Chiettes, that were a group of young girls from the Chinese community, the Chinese community girls drill team in particular. And she just wanted to encourage essentially young girls, young women, 11 to 21, to develop social skills and self-esteem to help them exist in a world that was trying to shove them down. And she adds, as she describes it, a little bit of Chinese flavor to the program, and especially to programs that she's involved in, like Seattle's annual Seafair and Torchlight Parade, which were traditionally limited to just men. But then Ruby convinces that they should sponsor women's teams in this. And it's just for immigrants and women, becomes a huge advocate to make sure that people are included in everyday life. Now, while we're talking about firsts, I think it's also time that we talk about a woman hero who, through her own tenacity and hard work, blazed the trail for women in a profession that was absolutely dominated by men. This woman right here, Sylvia Hunsicker, was hired in 1911. First as a registration clerk, but later on she transferred to the Seattle Police Department in 1915 and became the first woman officer on the job. And it was like unheard of at the time. You had to have a college degree. Men only needed to have a high school diploma. And so in 1925, when becomes the first and only woman to wear a police uniform, she has to make the uniform herself and essentially just retrofitted this long coat and then changed it into the official women's police uniform for the city police department, and continues to serve as a police officer throughout the rest of her life and career. She eventually gets discharged. Well, she actually gets suspended more than once throughout her service as a police officer, for reasons like, quote, engaging in work other than that assigned to her. So basically doing her job, doing something that was only seen as men's work, and then just not accepting that as the answer, because she keeps going throughout her entire career, always doing more and more. And so her main job was to do rescue work of children and to patrol dances in the area. And so this group, she always travels with another officer, a man, and she ends up getting dubbed the Purity Squad because her job is to essentially crack down on vice in the area. Everything that I've read throughout the Seattle police records lists her as a remarkable officer who was exemplary at her job and changes the way that people understand what a woman could and could not do. And she was also a huge advocate, not surprisingly, for watching out for young girls who would come to the big city alone and didn't know where to go, and she would steer them towards safety so they didn't just get scooped up by nefarious elements in the city of Seattle. And one of the really cool things that I really like about her is that during the Depression years in the 30s, the Seattle city government ran out of money. And so government jobs such as police and fire department received vouchers instead of paychecks. And they would have to go out to find people who would take cash or who would take vouchers instead of cash because there was no money in the city treasury to redeem them. So Sylvia, who had money saved up, helped keep the bankrupt city essentially afloat during the Great Depression by cashing police paychecks with her own money. Just out of the kindness of her own heart and a feeling of dedication to her former police officer or to her fellow police officers. She retires in 1936 at the age of 67 and goes on to live a wholesome life as part of the Purity Squad there in Seattle. I also want to talk to you about this woman here. You may know her. She is the daughter of Chief Seattle, who was given the name Princess Angeline. And she works as an advocate for essentially Indigenous people's rights. While Chief Seattle was very accommodating to a lot of the white settlers who came to the area and tried to find a way that people could live in peace, eventually the Duwamish tribe was removed from their traditional lands in Seattle. And Chief Seattle's daughter, Princess Angeline, becomes a woman who refuses to leave the area and constantly advocates for human rights, for Indigenous rights, and for understanding the fact that people can't just be removed from the area. So she continues to live her entire life on her ancestral lands out here, and becomes a beacon, not just for women, but for the Indigenous community, of understanding how far you could go to take back what is yours. I also, since time is brief here, I'm going to give a quick nod to Eiki Kuros, who was a teacher and an activist who spent her life advocating for education and social justice through pacifism. And she was born in Seattle, the daughter of 2 Japanese immigrants, and was essentially taught these values of empathy and pacifism through an early age, and then witnessed the struggle her parents went through, essentially with discriminatory housing laws. And then, of course, in 1941, during her senior year of high school, everything changes with the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and she is, despite being an American citizen, removed to one of the internment camps in Utah. After the conclusion of World War II, she's allowed to leave and return home. And if you are familiar with the stories of these internment camps, it's daunting. You know, there was no formal process for deconstructing them or letting people go back out into the community. It was sort of like, oh, I guess this is done now. Maybe you can go, maybe you can find your way out. And despite having been interned at one of these camps and living through this time, she continues a lifetime of advocating for understanding pacifism and working towards social justice through education. And so while she's building a community in Seattle in the 1960s, she works with the Congress of Racial Equity and serves on the board of the Young Women's Christian Association and helps advocate for fair housing, desegregation of schools, and the end, most predominantly, of unemployment or employment discrimination. So she establishes a Head Start program in her neighborhood and really just goes on to ensure that everybody has equal access to housing, to education, and to a better future. So there you go. As promised, a lot in a short period of time. And there's no way that I could possibly talk about all the women heroes in the area, but I've tried to give you guys at least a brief glimpse into a lot of what's been done in the area. And if nothing else, I hope you take away the fact that from the very beginning of this territory, through Washington Territory, through the beginning of Washington State to very, very right now, there have been incredible women who have advocated for the rights of those who don't have a voice for themselves, for those who have been put down, and they have pioneered new causes, new pathways, new professions, and new futures for all of us at the end of the day. And that is my humble bid to encourage you guys once more, please, if you can find it in your heart, using the QR code right up here, to donate to the American Cancer Society's Real Men Wear Pink campaign. I'm aiming for that 2,500 goal. Anything that we can do to ensure that the women of this community have an opportunity to identify breast cancer early on and have it removed so that no one has to lose anybody else out here to such an easily identifiable disease is something that I'm here for. So thank you guys for joining me tonight. I would encourage you to help donate, and I appreciate all of you who have. Thank you for helping contribute to a cause that genuinely is near and dear to my heart. And I hope that I get to see you guys soon for a new virtual experience. We have another Real Men Wear Pink tour, not this Friday, but next Friday, we're leading a ghost hunt through downtown Tacoma with new content that we've never discussed before on any of our ghost tours. And all you have to do to be a participant on that is make a contribution of any value to the American Cancer Society's Real Men Wear Pink campaign. I've been talking so much, I'm getting choked up here. So thank you guys for joining me tonight. I look forward to our next virtual experience together. And until then, celebrate a woman in your life and keep on exploring. I'll see you guys soon. Have a good night.